is Mandana. Welcome. Good afternoon. I'd just like to acknowledge our gathering and to acknowledge the custodians of the land on which we gather. Pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and our Aboriginal community members who are with us today and who are representing through artwork and work, spiritual work, creative work and deep research. I'm a curator. I work with the team here, Michael Laird, Jane Wilcock, Kiri Chan and Camilla Griffiths. We have a wonderful Anthropocene exhibition around us, which has been a collaborative process with the humanities and social science academics and researchers. And on display we have key artefacts and collection objects from our own collection here at the Anthropology Museum, as well as artworks such as Megan's work, which you will see a little bit later and through the video, and interviews with Dundaddy elders, and a video work by the Judgerong community down in Victoria. It's an honour and a privilege to have Megan here this afternoon. I've known Megan for quite some time, and to work with her on this exhibition has been really fantastic. If you don't mind, I will read out your amazing biography. Megan Cope is a Quandamooka artist from Moreton Bay on Stradbroke Island in South East Queensland. Her site-specific sculptural installations, public art practice and paintings investigate issues relating to colonial histories, the environment and mapping practices. Kinyingarra Guwinyanba features here. As you entered the museum, you would have seen the still from the artwork and again the video that I mentioned earlier. It's a hand-built sculptural formation and an important living project. I love this bit. On country, for country, in the waters of Minjerribah, and is an ongoing collaboration with her community. Cope and Kinyingarra Guwinyanba have been featured in ABC TV's artworks and off-country iterations and exhibitions, including This Language That Is Every Stone at the Institute of Modern Art in Brisbane, Low Pressure at the Malani Gallery in Brisbane, where I actually first encountered the artwork. I think it was April last year. And We on the Rising Wave at the Busan Biennale in South Korea. Her large-scale sculptural installations have been curated into 3 national survey exhibitions: the National at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, Defying Empire, 3rd National Indigenous Art Triennial at the National Gallery of Australia, and Sovereignty at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art in Melbourne. Megan's work is held by National Gallery of Victoria, Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art, National Gallery of Australia, the Art Gallery of Western Australia, Melbourne Museum, and Musée de la Civilisation in Canada, Quebec. Megan is represented by Malani Gallery here in Brisbane. If you have not visited Malani Gallery, I urge you to visit. They're quite nearby and brilliant. And Megan's a member of the Aboriginal Art Collective, Proper Out, who featured in one of the UQ Art Museum's exhibitions last year, which you may have seen also. Without further ado, Megan, welcome.
Thank you, Mandana. This is on. I just also like to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara sovereignty never ceded in this country, and pay my respects to my Quandamooka elders and family. Without their persistence, their resistance, their love, I wouldn't be here today sharing with you what they've shared with me. So thanks for this amazing exhibition. Thanks everyone for coming.
Appreciate it. Maybe we could start off by speaking about the work. I think that's probably the best place to start. So Megan, one of the key reasons why we really sought out the work and included in the exhibition is because of the deep research that you undertook to get here. You've been working with oyster shells for a number of years. Tell us about the process and sort of start from the beginning for all the folks that you met.
In many ways, the research started before I even realised I was researching, and by that I mean, our people are oyster people, and I've grown up eating oysters, growing oysters, learning about where they live, what they need, and what they do for us my whole life. So it's kind of in lots of ways very natural connection, and has been a really fantastic turning point in my career as such, to lean on something so familiar, return to something so familiar. You know, I've listened to many stories in my life about the decline of Kinyingarra, which is oyster in our language, and even when I was growing up in Tasmania, another island, a long way from Minjerribah, we had a lot of, you know, we used to go and collect oysters from the Esperance River. They were about, you know, this big, and then my father made fish traps at home, and we would store the oysters in there, and every time someone came, we'd impress them with these big oysters, and we'd have parties and eat them, and it's kind of really how I started to use oysters in my practice was unconscious. I was living in Melbourne, you know, for the past 7 years before COVID, and I found myself really busy all the time and not having time for my friends. But when I would have these small windows, I would go and buy, you know, 200 oysters at the Victoria Fish Market, Queen Victoria Fish Market, and have oyster parties, kind of like what, you know, my father would do. Wasn't really conscious at the time, but naturally, a big midden started to appear in my backyard, and I started to look at this and think, started thinking about ways to make sculptures, and I guess start discussing, you know, and focusing on it. So, then I started to actually research, looking at middens, you know, desecration of these architectural forms built by our ancestors. And then, you know, this led me to looking at the lime burning industry, first industry that was established here, very lucrative industry. And then I started to, you know, focus a bit more on, you know, what does it mean in a cultural, social context when we remove one architectural form and replace it with another. And this is actually a colonial behaviour that's occurred all over the world, over and over again. It's quite predictable in that sense. Just wanted to make works that started to talk about that. Yeah.
I guess moving back to Queensland, was that shift and being present and being in a different place in a sense, how did that affect it? I guess after the Melbourne stint, you always come home anyway.
Yeah. Well, people always ask me, where do you live? I was like, are you a Queensland artist? You know, who are you? You know, I'm a Quandamooka person, and I used to come home a lot, just get in the car and drive back to Queensland regularly, especially when it was cold down there. I don't feel like I didn't really ever become Victorian, or I knew I wouldn't be there forever. It was just a time, I guess, a decision as an artist to go and challenge myself, because Brisbane's such a beautiful, strong community in the arts. I imagine in other areas as well. So I just sort of wanted to challenge myself a little bit. Yeah.
So I guess back to the earlier works and maybe the mapping works that you had, and I'm sure some of you might be familiar with the works that were at the Queensland Arts Gallery of Modern Art as part of the River exhibition quite a few years ago. But could you elaborate a little bit more about those works and how they worked in with your connection to country and looking back on those?
Yeah, I guess, before the sculptural work with the oysters, I was doing a lot of mapping. So very keen to talk about land rights, talk about our cultural rights, talk about our history, and include our language over military maps as a kind of strategy to decolonise our sense of place. But I guess most importantly, to make space for ourselves and for Aboriginal people, because we're often rendered invisible or rendered, the tide's turned a lot in recent years, but I guess the context of my practice started 15, 20 years ago when you could say to people, hands up, who believes Brisbane is an Aboriginal place. No one would acknowledge that, they would argue with you that it isn't. That's kind of the context of why I decided to use maps to say that all of this place is Aboriginal, and we still have our connections, and we still want it back as well. So that's why I was doing the mapping. There were two sorts of strategies in there in terms of decolonial thinking and practice, and one is the obvious one through language, but also one through a hypothetical view of sea level rise. So what you see in a lot of my maps is a 5 to 7 metre sea level rise, and I wanted people to think about this 10 years ago, way before it was on the lips of every politician, because our people remember Quandamooka before the sea rose, when it was a valley and not a bay, about 5,000-6,000 years ago. And of course this has been told to me through previous generations, and that memory of our country in a different time and form is something that we inherit. So I wanted to, instead of painting paintings of that, using colonial tools of dispossession such as maps to transfer or apply this knowledge, I thought was a good strategy. And to project it into the future is a way to include us all in the future, because here we are now living here together, and we will all be dealing with this problem. So that's kind of what those maps were about, and I guess when you do the same thing over and over and over, you get a bit bored, and that's and you need to have oyster parties, and then working with in lots of ways it was a simple response to my environment, this midden that was building up in my backyard, and thinking of ways to use the material and I guess move from this topographical detached perspective of country and start to move into a more intimate space, with your feet on the ground, and in a more visceral space. I guess sculpture has started to do that.
I think they're almost immersive sculptures, because as you walk towards them, it's that sense of being in a place and looking at something monumental. And even the material at the time that you were using was sort of concrete and not the shell itself. It evoked that immediate response in you, and thinking about those places where shells gathered and were left.
Yeah, and look, unfortunately, I just have not even been able to attempt to get to the scale of the original middens before they were mined. But I hope that we can use our imaginations when we think about the scale to which these forms were prior to their excavation and extraction.
This sense of, and the titling and the kind of reference to your work as being regenerative aquaculture. Could you speak a little bit about that, and speak a tiny bit, because I watched the Facebook post from I couldn't attend Stradbroke Island sessions.
Oh, yeah.
The life cycle of an oyster. That's something that I've been telling visitors for the last few months, and it just fascinates and completely captures people's imagination.
Yeah, well, they're such really humble little mollusks that do so much for us, actually. There's just so much to talk about when we focus on Kinyingarra. But I guess our relationship with oysters is informed by the marketplace, and we receive an individual shell that has a market value, and we eat it and throw the shell, and it's quite a quick process. But when you grow oysters, you know, it takes about 4 years if you're going to eat a native oyster, 5 years for plate, 4 years for bistro. So actually, and actually how oysters like to grow is, and to exist, is like us. They like to grow in clusters, and they like to be around each other, and they like to grow on their ancestors, and you know, there's a lot of things like that that we're removed from when we buy an oyster at the shop. So yeah, you can see here, for instance, in this reef restoration form, you can see that they grow like coral in clusters. So oystering is very hard work. Basically, the oystermen have got to go through a process of breaking the individuals apart and separating them from the others to prepare for the marketplace so that they have a per unit value, I guess. One thing that really astounded me with the research was that, you know, with the lime burning industry and the demand for lime to build the colony, once the you know, middens that were, you know, 10 metres high, 100 metres long in some instances, so enormous amounts of shell that, you know, if you're on a boat, you could see them. You could see these forms on land, and they're very distinct. They would have been bright white formations. You know, once those shell piles were exhausted, the colonists resorted to scraping live oysters off rocks and burning those as well. This process occurred in a very short space of time, about 10 years, with their arrival, and you can imagine the immense change in the quality of water in Quandamooka in that space of time. So a lot of the works, I guess, have been this 6-7 year process of museum displays and conversations about what oysters do, what our middens were, and you know, I've done this over and over and over to a point, I guess, where I've become not frustrated, but perhaps bored, or I had a realisation that maybe the museum acts like a morgue. Maybe the artworks become dead objects, really, that we talk to, which is okay, and it's beautiful, but there comes a time, I think, where we need to do more. So I started to ask myself those questions: what more can I do? What is the relationship between institution and country and community and culture? How do we actually start to effectively use resources? You know, and talking to my uncles and cousins who grow oysters, a lot of them, and you know, like Uncle Gary and Uncle Ricky were fantastic in that talk. You know, Uncle Gary, you know, he's so cranky all the time, but I love it. You know, it's very hard work, and a lot of we just don't have the capacity and the resources to grow the oysters and then even compete in the domestic market with oysters. So what ends up happening is that our people just pay for the leases and grow oysters for family. So, you know, at least we have that cultural resource that is for family. But I guess, you know, I wanted to see if we could challenge the system, challenge the framework, use art money to enter the space of cultural restoration in this specific space. All these photographs are from our studio that was just under this big tree, which is on a little lot that the fishermen have in our family. And yeah, we just got to work, and you know, I guess working with artists who are a bit different and a bit more willing to do some strange work and to do a lot of labour making objects in ways that my family don't have capacity to do. A lot of family are juggling community politics, especially like with native title now more than ever. You know, they're working multiple jobs, 6, 7 jobs, plus the seasonal work that comes, plus taking care of family. So, you know, their human resources are very stretched. And I was keen to see if we could activate an artwork through an exhibition and, you know, create a living sculpture. So that's what Kinyingarra Guwinyanba is, and we did it through this language that is every stone. We got funding through Create New South Wales. At the time I was living in Lismore, it was before the flood, and so there were a lot of artists coming and drilling shells, and a lot of the shells I had collected from restaurants in Moreton Bay, and they were all about, you know, they loved it. So we were collecting lots and lots of oyster shells and drilling them, preparing them, and turning them into the sculptural forms. And
that process is you actually clustering them around these poles.
Yeah. So the bank that we've planted the poles on is a very important site for our people. Many generations worked on that bank. My great granny and Uncle Ricky's granny, they were very good friends. They worked on that bank together. So this project felt very poetic. All these generations down, where we were, you know, planting a cultural object that could hopefully return you know, the numbers of oysters, attempt, because as Professor Nigel Preston says in the ABC documentary, you know, that whole area would have just been a complete carpet of oysters. It's a big reef, ancient reef, that's, you know, just, you know, it's been extracted over the last 100 years. Uncle Ricky has left it to rest. He's wanted to see if the oysters can come back on their own. He's not really, he's quite kind of conflicted by the kind of mandatory process from fisheries is to use materials like plastic and polystyrene. As an Aboriginal man, he just doesn't feel comfortable using those materials, knowing that they're actually toxic. So he's kind of, you know, in a way resisted these methods and left it to rest and kind of waiting it out, hoping that, you know, because the thing is, if you have an oyster lease and it's not productive, you're always at risk of confiscation, even if you pay. You have to be performing and productive for the colony. So it's great that that hasn't happened. And when I proposed these ideas to him, he thought it would be a great opportunity because it would look like we're returning to some kind of agricultural practice that is legal and ancestral in many ways as well. So but we've only been able to achieve it through art. It's sort of not really, I mean, there are grants available, but again, you know, you're limited to the constraints of the institution. Dr. Nigel Preston, for instance, worked for the CSIRO for 40 years. He was so enlivened by this project because as an artist, you know, we're kind of, you know, it's a guerrilla art project. And it's like we're not going to ask permission. We'll ask for forgiveness later, or we'll expose it to so many people through the ABC, for instance, that if we were to get in trouble, we would have the backing of the public, because you know what we're doing really is caring for country. And whilst it might be illegal in some respects, it is causing no harm to nobody, you know. So that was the strategy, and it was important for me to have, you know, a qualified white fella on the team, just in case, because, you know, that's the reality. We are always at risk. We're always being surveilled by government departments, fisheries, for instance. So any act of care or restoration as Indigenous people can be, you know, viewed as illegal, or we could, you know, can be persecuted for it. So this day we deliberately planned to do it on Invasion Day, and it felt very meaningful and transformative, and yeah.
Ceremonial in some sense. Was that first one going into the ground? Did you, or was it just a big group?
No, it was a big group. Yeah, it was all of the artists who had been along the journey from the start, like working in Lismore, and we just packed up, chucked everything in a trailer and brought it up, and stayed in a house, and then continued to assemble on that little fish packing block. And then we loaded up the boats and made this form on Invasion Day last year, ahead of the exhibition at the IMA. Yeah.
And how many poles are still in situ?
We've done about 110, which is 1% of my original goal. And it's a work in progress. It's a learning process as well. What I've learnt is I was using fishing tackle to crimp the wires, but a lot of the shells have fallen off because those crimps have dissolved, which is kind of good news in lots of ways. Like I was thinking, you know, fishing tackle, you see it on the rocks all the time, but it appears they're using metals that dissolve now in a short space of time. So now we're just tying a wire, which simplifies the process. But the big circular one, there's only 2 poles where the oysters are fully attached and grown into themselves and attached to the log in time before the host shell-based fell off the poles. So actually there's quite a lot of maintenance that I need to do once I'm not doing other art projects. But you know, this is a long-term project, and I want to keep planting, and I also want to keep the kind of the communal aspect alive. So how I'm developing the work model is for university groups or artists or visitors when they want to come and see the work. It's not in a public space, it's private and it's for country, it's not really for us. So this is quite radical, I think, for lots of people. I mean, we all sort of have this natural curiosity and also a little bit of entitlement. Like, my natural inclination was first to return stones to the intertidal zone. However, it's illegal to put rocks on the seafloor. I found out, and you can't put shells on the seafloor either. So that's when I talked to my uncles about, you know, what other materials, because they use in agriculture or oyster growing, they use metal poles and long lines, and then they grow them on the bags. And I said, what about timber? Because, you know, Uncle Rick doesn't want plastic or metal, or, you know. And he said, no, you can use timber. So I said, well, what timber did our old people use? And it's cypress pine, Burugari, and cypress pine is a very special wood. It's very full of oil, and it's quite resistant to water. It can be in the water for a long time. It's a bit like turpentine. A lot of on Bunjalung country, there's a red cedar, old cedar, and turpentine there. And in fact, those trees were stripped to build wharfs to export materials out of Australia. So that timber is also waterproof. So that's what we've used in these sculptures. And attaching the shell to that timber in its sort of in these spirals and clusters was to I guess create a little foundation or a home for the oysters, which, you know, they travel in a very kind of they're like spat, but before they're spat, they're not a bacteria, but very micro level organism, and they travel in the water column. When it rains, they move fast because the fresh water moves faster. I had this nightmare that after we planted it, and then there was the intense flooding events, I thought, oh, everything would be dead. The water would have just collapsed all the holes. And I was wrong, like the holes were fine, and actually there'd been so many baby oysters, so much spat attached to the oysters, to the shell waste. But yeah, it's like looking at those facts of the organism that they like to grow on their ancestors, and just sort of designing a cultural object that could accommodate the objective in capturing, so that they could colonise. And Dr. Nigel Preston said that we'd probably get a few other species moving as well, but that, you know, would be of benefit to the oysters as well. So there's lots of barnacles that are growing, and I guess maybe down the track, I mean, one of the things that Uncle Ricky talks about, like when they were kids and they were growing oysters, is the old fellas would pay the kids to take off this little periwinkle that would, so this is at a time when there was a lot of oysters. There was also this periwinkle that would attach and it would actually eat the oyster. So they were asked as kids to go with buckets and take all these, like weeding, you know, if you look at it as gardening, the kids would remove this periwinkle so that the oysters had more chance to survive. So I think at some stage we might implement that process to this artwork if we decide that that's necessary. But yeah, it's a lot of really incredible processes. Yeah.
They stood the test of time. That was a matter of a month. if you planted in January, the floods happened in February.
Yeah. And then we went to visit them in March, and there was, like, even my cousins who are oyster growers, they kind of, they thought I was a bit mad. They thought, why would you do this? Is it art? Like, okay. Because of course, you know, they're trying to make a living, you know, and Dylan, whose grandson, a nephew, you know, he's the only one who's attempting to produce the oysters for the commercial market. He's got capacity and the drive to do it, and he's setting himself up. But yeah, they all thought I was a bit nuts. And then when we went out there, they were just blown away and so excited. And so that, yeah, within 2 months it was success, and we knew it was like affirming that this could work. And
It wasn't just folly. Yeah.
no, just not just like gammon art in a gallery doing nothing, or something, saying it's doing something, not doing anything. I mean, you know, like, yeah, these works are really beautiful, but you know, in lots of ways I feel like at some point, you know, I started contradicting myself, and you know, we really, I think we are at that stage now where we must give ourselves permission to take that level of action. You know, I know that like eco-feminism is very popular in art school now, you know, and a lot of, you know, when I was teaching in Victoria, a lot of the young women were asking me, you know, and they were like putting dead trees in the gallery. I'm like, well, you know, is this about life or is this about death? You know, we have to ask ourselves these questions, and if it's about death, then we have to push ourselves a bit more. I mean, what does it mean to go down to your local creek and think about slowing the water down, or even just documenting this and creating a journal of how the water is behaving, and to start a relationship with this body of water. You know, we just have to kind of, I think, transcend and challenge ourselves a bit more now.
And consider what's happening before our eyes, not just what's past and what's been lost.
Absolutely.
I had that big grin on my face because we actually entertained the idea of having a dead tree within the gallery. We have actually some amazing collection artifacts that are sensitive in nature that we wanted to incorporate within the exhibition, carved trees that are very important. But we were considering how the elemental nature of the Anthropocene exhibition could have this elements of fire and water and earth. And there was a point where we actually almost asked Kerry to bring in, from recent fires, the remnants of what a tree would be. And I think, thank God we didn't, because it's replicating this idea that through these abjectly horrifying kind of experiences, what's left is what we should be memorializing or considering as action. I don't know, what's the action that's being taken? What's the cultural burning practices? What are some of the considerations against stopping those infernos from happening again? Sea level rises. How to mitigate those things rather than just within our white boxes
create memorials. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's parts of that could be, you know, really, really special. I mean, I'm thinking about the smell, I guess. You know, with after a fire that can be really visceral. But yeah, I really, I'm kind of thinking the same thing. I'm interested in this because I guess so much of our cultural material exists in the bowels of institutions, and our people don't have access, or very, very limited access. And so, you know, one way to kind of, I guess you've got to think about it and understand that this is a process of control, that the institution colonial framework has got on our people, and what does it mean when we have access to the living aspects of the cultural objects. I mean, I kind of like the idea that once we have those tools and we can practice this and we can make new things, and not for tourists and not for the white gaze, but for our culture and our community and country, then it kind of renders the museum, or it kind of challenges that power and dare I say value of these cultural objects that are very, you know, they exist in the institution in their particular values, because attached to that is this idea that the practice is lost, that the people are dead, and therefore it's a very scarce commodity. Well, you know, it's the same kind of logic with Kinyingarra Guwinyanba. Let's plant so many oysters that the oyster industry, you know, kind of is challenged by that, and that the oceans actually get to benefit from that, and that all other living things benefit from that. And so, you know, I kind of think we can do the same. And I know that weaving has started that as well, but I would say that with the weaving revival, there must be planting, and there must be other seasonal aspects that are attached to the, you know, creation of objects for museums. We need to kind of have a more holistic approach to this practice. Yeah.
Care is not in just the presentation.
Well, I mean, because if we don't, perhaps these reeds will become endangered, and then we become colonisers, you know, so we have to be really careful. Yeah.
Yeah. We do have time for probably a couple more questions. I know you're all blown away. Anyone want to ask Megan, this will be your one chance while we can be honest with us. Maybe you guys. Oh yeah. You can go first.
How is the process of ownership of the art? Because if you're working with different artists, is that like, is it shared, or you don't really like think about like copyright and how this art can be like reproduced without your permission to do it? Like, what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, you have to be humble, and you have to be committed to the objective. It's not really about me. It's rather development of a technology, perhaps, that intersects between art and science. And if I'm authentic about my intentions, then I should be happy if other people also wish to create or replicate this idea, because it's not for me, it's for country. So, and it's for the oysters. So yeah, there is a level, and that does challenge, you know, that challenge art. But I guess, you know, in the modern world, there's the other side, which I would like to kind of, and my gallerist, my dealer, art dealer, he likes to talk about it in a way that we could be exporting Quandamooka culture and technology to the rest of the world. And that's a really positive thing as well. Certainly when I was in Korea, we had a very rich cultural exchange, because the women, the oysterers in South Korea is led by women, and it's ancient. And they have middens also, and actually they planted timber as well. So actually this isn't, you know, like I started, this isn't really me or my idea. In a way it is, in the way that I've done it in an art thing, but it's an embodiment, it is an inheritance of knowledge that's before me, and you know, if it is for country, then it goes beyond the individual. So, yeah, I mean, the most important thing is that if this gets co-opted or incorporated, that it gets resourced to fund artists or scientists, whoever wants to do it. You know, I think that's the focus. I am working with some people to research and build an economic model around this idea to see if we can perhaps, I mean, I work in the arts, could be employed in other areas that are better resourced, I'm not sure. But I think art is this place where we do have autonomy, we do have a readiness to resist or to rebel against government or you know, we kind of have a bit of autonomy. And legally we also have some protection through art or satire or through that framework. Art's quite special in a way, I think. So the economic model that we want to build is kind of in the scope of artists being together to do residencies, go to places and do this. But of course, you would not have to be an artist to participate because the design is accessible.
Yeah, so earlier you were talking about your maps of Quandamooka country and how that can be sort of like this colonial, like topographical, like representation of land, and sort of the art of, apologize, I'm about to butcher this name, Kinyingarra, or like the
Kinyingarra Guwinyanba.
Yes, sorry, I didn't butcher that name tag, but that's like collected and you're on the boots on the ground. Have you ever sort of like combined the two different art mediums and maybe done different like maps of that art project and like looking at the movement of oysters and making that a collective effort, or have they kind of stayed as like two separate sort of like collective art projects that you've done?
Oh, I'd love to see that actually. I mean, like this is where, you know, this place of collaboration exists, you know, with science and art. I think it's really exciting. And scientists and artists have worked together for centuries to visualise knowledge, and so yeah, I think that maybe this will happen. I mean, certainly there's another arm of UQ that Dr. Nigel Preston, because he's here, he wants to start documenting this project because he's confident that it will in fact lead to regeneration of seagrass. So he's keen to get involved now to see, to study these forms to see if that actually happens, because based on the knowledge, you know, and the theory that it should happen. So, you know, it's
sounds like a longitudinal study that would be supported by the ARC, that would be incorporating arts practice and scientific research.
Yeah.
More conversations to be
maps.
had. Yeah. We're going to have bigger contributors well later in the year with public programs, so the conversation will actually continue.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, great.
Yeah, there aren't any more questions. Oh, one more.
Great.
So I feel like oysters tell the story of the place where they lived when you eat them. Can you just describe what does a Minjerribah oyster taste like? What's special about those oysters?
Well, we know, so there are indicators on land through the native hot bush. When that flowers, that tells us that the oysters are best to eat, and that's about September. And at that time when the hot bush is flowering, they're quite tangy, and they're not fat and creamy, but they're full-bodied, and I guess it's the time before they start to spawn. some people like to eat them when they're spawning. I'm not really into that, but rather it's good to take them out of the water and in their shell, and then leave them for about a week. And what happens is, because they're live, they absorb all the water inside the shell, and then you open them and they're like very lovely and plump. Yeah. That's best description. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, look, you know, the Australian government's been kind of offering oyster growers financial incentives to grow Pacific oysters. Pacific oysters are native to Japan, and you know, they're big oysters, and they're kind of they're the kind of oyster that I think we're most familiar with. The native oysters are a bit smaller and a bit more gnarly, but look, it was really pleasing to hear that a lot of the New South Wales oyster growers resisted these incentives. They were very happy just to supply the domestic market because they were not willing to take risks to introduce new species to waterways, which is really fantastic. I know in Tasmania and South Australia, there's the majority of Pacific oyster production in this country. You know, they're vulnerable to lots of diseases, and there's mass outbreaks that then cause problems for fish and other species. So, you know, it's quite interesting when we look at the industry and the kind of marketplace, and yeah, I think there's much more enjoyment and connection to have when we enjoy the native oysters. Yeah, they're much more complex in their flavour, and I mean that's formed over a longer period of time. The Pacific oyster matures in 1 year to the size of 5 years of a native oyster. So, you know,
fantastic with common sense and experience of
yeah.
actually.
And I think love and respect for, I mean, because it's a pretty hard trade. So you've got to be a particular kind of person, I think, to grow oysters and to endure the conditions. And someone was just asking me the other day, you know, when I first won an art award, I didn't know I was going to win, but the journalist rang me beforehand and said, "Oh, what if you win? What would you do with the money?" And I thought, I don't know, like maybe buy an oyster farm. I thought that was really weird. Then I won, and he said, "You gonna buy the oyster farm?" I said, "Oh, yeah, maybe." And my father was like, "Don't be mad, like don't be ridiculous. You have to give up your art career." So, you know, that was a long time ago, and it's kind of nice to have found, you know, a place in between. My dad's really proud. He really loves this too, you know. It's like, keep going. There's, you know, it's about balance. And, yeah.
It's inspirational, it's not just an artwork.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Thanks very much.
We will continue our public programs in May with the National Archaeology Week presentations, lunchtime lectures again as well. We'll be encouraging everybody to bring a lunchbox outside, have a gathering, and then come on in for the researchers who've worked on the exhibition to deliver their 35 to 45-minute conversationals walking through the exhibition that you see. Thank you for visiting with us. See you next time.
Thank you.